Oh, God, Johnny, you're killing me. You are. Just give me a moment, you Egypt. Ay, 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 ay. All right. So, okay, we're here. I think everything's working. There was a great deal of last minute freak out from the dog who wanted to be in, then wanted to be out, then wanted to be in, but with the door open to the hall, and then, ay, ay, ay. So here I am, dog no longer here, door is closed, so it'll only be a matter of time till he comes to scratch on the door again to find out why I have shut him out of my life. Oh, dogs. Anyway, hi. I'm Tad. It's Sunday. It's about a minute after 7 o'clock Northern California time. I am going to be reading in just a few minutes once I figure out what all is going on and why and who I am and what exactly is my plan in being here. In the interim, while I'm figuring that out, you can all do whatever seems best to you. I'm actually, I mean, I'm here. I'm just not quite on top of things yet. All right. So anyway, I have no idea who's here, who's not here, what's going on. Okay. So we want that account. Right. Okay. Good. Okay. We seem to be doing all right. So the first few folks have shown up. So I will say hello and good afternoon or good evening to Isaac and Susan Shamblin and Tracy McClatchy. Hello, hello. And Ron, my friend. Good to see you, Ron. And Monica. Hello, Monica. And Claudia. And Jack Barucha. Hello. Oh, that's a new name. How lovely to have you with us. Good to see you. And Kristen. Hello. Nice to see you too. Wait, for some reason, all of a sudden now, for the first time ever, I have all kinds of information on this page. I have no idea where this came from or why I haven't had this previously in other broadcasts. But I've got like viewer numbers, reactions, stream metrics. Oh my God. And where has this been all my life? I don't know. Anyway, who else has just popped in? Kelly. Hello, Kelly. Checking in from Alberta. Ray. Hello, Ray Weatherford. Good to see you. Penny Davies. Hello, hello. Jeremy. Hi. Sorry we did not make it to BayCon today. It's been just a batch of craziness. A batch of craziness. So let me see. There's Jeremy and anybody else that I have missed. Barban, hello. Medardo, hello. Emily, hello, hello. All right, good to see you, Emily, and good to see you, Medardo and Barb Ann as well. And I will check in on other folks as they show up. Meanwhile, in the interim, I will figure out what it was I was going to talk about before the dog started to freak out. This is one of the problems with being a dog owner. Dogs are not like cats. Yes, cats love you if you are their owner and you feed them and all that. It's a calm love. It's a distant love. It's occasionally a rather, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Not amoral, but it's a measured love. Whereas dogs, especially needy dogs, the need goes so deep. And Big Dog Johnny is one of those dogs. His needs go very deep. And when all of his people aren't around, he gets worried and upset. And, when he sees the suitcase, which means somebody's going on a trip somewhere, he gets morose and he stops eating. And, I mean, he's a case. He's a case. I love him dearly. He's the dog I've been most attached to in the last 20 years of all of them. And I've had some very fabulous dogs that have lived with us. But perhaps it's something about his neediness that calls out to me. I think I've told you guys that my family, and especially my mom, inculcated in us what I often refer to as Charlie Brown Christmas tree syndrome, which is a personal feeling of responsibility that if anybody is sad, suffering, whatever the case, that it's our personal duty, and again, I learned this from my mom, but everybody in the family has it to an extent. That's our personal duty to make things right somehow. And of course, this comes from the Charlie Brown, Christmas special, the very first Charlie Brown Peanut special that they did for television. Where they go out, Charlie Brown goes out with Linus. I mean, you all know this. Well, at least those of you who are in America must know this. Charlie Brown goes out with Linus to pick out a tree for the school Christmas play, and Charlie Brown sees this pathetic, pathetic little tree and says, essentially, we should get that one, because the implication is because no one else will. And this was a strong family thing going on all the time. My mom, we used to have a little like old-fashioned department store in our neighborhood, not actually all that far from where I live now, although the store itself is long gone. And my mother used to make us go there to buy shoes. And this was, like I said, it's a small department store, about, not much bigger than a drugstore, but with 2 levels and all kinds of stuff crammed in. This is, privately owned, not a chain or anything. And my mom used to make us, when we were kids, go there to get our shoes, and she would always say, well, I feel bad for the guys who work there. They never look like they're doing anything. And I used to get really upset, Mom, it's because their shoes are crappy, they're weird and old. But that's, that's despite my frustrations when I was thwarted by the Charlie Brown Christmas tree syndrome when I was young, it's carried over. It's me, and I think that is very much a factor in why I'm so attached to Johnny. He is definitely, except for his size, I mean, he's a good sized big dog, but other than that, he is a Charlie Brown Christmas tree dog. He's full of worries and woe and sadness. He's like kind of a weird combination of Piglet and Eeyore in the Winnie the Pooh books. He has all of Eeyore's sadness and all of Piglet's fears. So anyway, but at the moment he's out of the room. So he's probably sitting at the door listening, going, how can he say these things about me? Anyway, what else did I want to talk to you guys about? So I mentioned last night when I was reading, or before I started reading, I mentioned that I'm finishing up Navigator's Children, the final draft, essentially. And really, I only have a few more chapters to go on that rewrite, which will probably only take me a few more days. But then I have one last pass, which I'm going to tell you guys about, because it's a little bit of behind-the-scenes stuff that might interest some of you. And that is, I have to do the pass for time of day, phases of the moon, days of the year, how much time has passed. And the reason for that, and what I'm talking about, is that if you look at one of my manuscripts, and the people who have seen my manuscripts know this already, if you look at one of my manuscripts, I can't speak for other writers, but I have everything that has a date or a time of the day or anything that is at all subject to question. Phase of the moon, how long it's been since something else happened, anything like that, and I highlight it in red. So every couple of pages, there's, something highlighted in red, sometimes more than one thing. And the reason is, of course, because when you're in the process of not only writing a multi-plot line book, like the big fantasies tend to be for me, but you're also revising, which means you're changing things, you're moving things around and all that, trying to lock in anything in terms of how long things take or what how long, what day of the year it is or things like that, which is the kind of stuff you need to know to sort out the different timelines and who's where, and and how long it's taking to get from one place to another, and all that kind of stuff. Well, it's hard enough to try and lock that stuff down when you're writing a first draft, but it's bound to change. So I just kind of put these placeholders in there. I put something in there, or sometimes it's just an asterisk, and I mark them in red. And as a result, then, like when I've finished now, and my manuscript in a few days will be done, except for all those little red bits. And those little red bits, as compared to things that I just wanted to look up about characters, details, or whatever, which I've dealt with during the draft, during the rewrite. But those things I have to do all at once, and I have to do them once everything is locked down in terms of where it is in the story and how it relates to other plot lines and character lines. Then I have to sit down and figure out, literally how much time passes with each scene. I have to start early. I have to set a date that is appropriate, or any date that I've named becomes locked in or carved in stone. And then I have to move forward from there and make sure that everything from there on tracks. So, I will lock down the date here, and then I go to the next one and I go, okay, so the next chapter is going on about the same time, but it mentions that then 3 days pass. So we jack that forward 3 days to this part of the chapter, and then, et cetera, et cetera. So I keep figuring out where each thing is in regards to the master date that I've started at the beginning of the book, and how each plot line relates to that, and how far it's moved forward, and how many days it took people to get from here to there. And whether, since there's simultaneity, especially near the end of the book, there's simultaneity of things happening, which, although we're jumping around from character viewpoint to character viewpoint, and some of them are quite far away from others, but still some of these things are happening at the same time. And so as a result, I have to make sure that the times of day track, that if I'm saying that event A and event B, despite being 200 miles apart, are both happening at the same time, I have to make sure that I'm not saying event A is happening at noon and event B is happening at the onset of sunset, say, for instance, or something. In other words, those things have to match if I'm trying to put across that they're simultaneous. So there's a number of factors like that. Phases of the moon I have to settle early on. Once I get a date, I can start a moon calendar and then go through the whole story to make sure that the phases of the moon, which I don't mention that often, but it is part of describing the natural world. And in a pre-industrial world, how bright the moon was is a crucial factor, because you can't do anything at night when or in some kind of artificial light. Whereas during a full moon, for instance, people can go out and find their way around at night and all kinds of things. So I have to lock that down, and then once that's locked down, then I can go through and I can just use a regular year calendar, a moon phase calendar for a year. And once I've established where the moon is at the beginning of the story, then I can go on each one. I'll know, because I've narrowed down the dates. I can go, okay, so this is 4 months and half a month, 4.5 months since I started this thing. So that means that the moon is 4 months plus 2 weeks, and coordinate things. So that's basically that's the last thing that I have to do before I ship it off to the publishers. Now, here is the weirdness. The weirdness is I have no idea what's going on with the pub date at the moment. Unfortunately, as I knew it would, our move made things a bit confused, and so I don't know what the publishers are going to do. I'm really only about a few weeks behind, but that can make differences of half a year or more in publishing schedules. So we will see what we will see, and I will let you know as I find out more. But anyway, so that's pretty much, except for those last few chapters that I have to do my revision of. That's really the only thing that's left, is this whole kind of tightening up of the gears, I guess, if you want to say it, the gears of time that operate in the background of the story, so that everything tracks and makes sense. This is this was never an issue when in books where it's only a single character viewpoint, like in Tail Chaser's Song, most of Tail Chaser's Song, or the Bobby Dollar books, or even the one we're reading now, because you don't have to compare different plot lines and figure out how they relate to each other. So it's much easier to set out a timeline and do it early on and stick with it. Okay, so that's a lot of babble, but the basic point is there. So let me just check in and see who else has said hello that I might not have said hello to yet. And yep, various folks checking in and telling me stories about their animals, which I always like. Carrie, hello. Hey, Tad, would you be willing to give a shout out to my daughter, Daenerys? Of course I would. Hello, Daenerys. Good to see you. And nice to have you joining us. Yeah, I figured out that was shout, Carrie, not ahoyt. Although I would have been happy to send an ahoyt also, because, you know, I'm just that way. Rook, hey, sweetie, good to see you, even albeit virtually. A pleasure, as always. Isaac, I already said hello to. Jack, yes. There's Winter. Hello, Winter. And Greg Gadrasic. Hello, Greg. Good to see you. Winter. Hello, sweetie. A pleasure as always. Sherry. Hi, Sherry. Tim Speckins. Good to see you, Tim. Christy. Hi, Christy. That's Christy Sanders. Margaret. Good evening. Tony Graham. Hello. And I think I've said hello to everybody who's checked in. If I've missed anybody, I apologize. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. That's the dog scratching at the door. Maybe I should see if he wants to come in before I get started. Oh, dog. Dog. Okay, you have to make up your mind. If you're coming in, come in. If you're not coming in, don't come in. But don't just sit there at the door scratching. Oh, God. Anyway, he walks off. He has accomplished his goal, which was to force me to open my door. I am going to start reading. So, we started Brothers of the Wind last night, or early this morning. Just a quick recap. It started out with Pamon Kes, who is Pt.286, one of the changeling race, introducing himself, talking about his master Hakatri, who of course is Zendaya, or Scythe, as we mortals would call them. And he talks about Hakatri, Hakatri's brother Inaluki, who is slightly mercurial and occasionally difficult, and of course Hakatri's parents, Amaterasu and Unigato. And during the course of the first part, a bunch of mortals, meaning people like you and me, showed up at the court, which is Azua. This is what the Hayholt will eventually be built on top of about 1,000 years later. Well, not 1,000 years, about 500-600 years later. The story is about 900 years or something like that before Dragonbone Chair. This story, Brothers of the Wind. Anyway, a bunch of Hernistir men, or Hernistiri, show up, and these mortals say there is a dragon that has gotten into their countryside and is terrorizing the place, and it's a huge, awful, scary dragon, and they say that it's the famous black worm, Cold Drake, Hidohebi the Black. The black snake, the black worm, has a bunch of names. So, Inaluki, Hakatri's younger brother, disputes that this is possible and is upbraided for it by his parents. The next morning, he and Hakatri and some others are supposed to go out to go do something, and not the dragon, and they discover that Inaluki has disappeared. So I'm going to continue from that. So, of course, the main character here, the person who is telling the story, Pamon Kes, is kind of the squire. He's an armiger, but that means essentially squire. He's a Katri's squire. He's the only one of his people, his race, the sort of not very well thought of Pt.286 race to have held such a high position, a position of such power, and that in and of itself is evidence of how Hakatri is more maybe open-minded than many of the other Scythe. Anyway, so that's what they've just discovered, that Inaluki is missing. As I feared, said Hakatri when I told him. He has left Azua. May the garden forgive his foolish pride. He was called Clearsight, and indeed he had eyes as sharp as a soaring hawk, but he only saw the best in those around him, which is why he was one of my master's closest companions, while not his most trustworthy counselor. Inaluki often does that when he is unhappy with your parents. Taking his armor and his hunting spear, Hakatri shook his head. I spoke to the stable guards before I met you. He has gone and told no one of his plans. What do you think that sounds like? Okay, now I can hear my kids. God, it's hell having dogs and kids. But those of you who have dogs and kids, I'm not telling you anything new, am I? All right, so that was where we sounds like. Inaluki's armiger, Yoe, trotted up, her hair unbraided and eyes wide. Is my lord with you? She asked my master. I cannot find him anywhere. He seems to have taken bronze and rode out by himself before sunrise, Hakatri said. Hurry to the gate and ask the watch there if they saw him. Then go to my lady, Nidreu, his heart friend, and learn if he said anything to her that would explain his absence. Yoe turned and hurried out. He would not go after the worm alone, would he? I asked. If he feels his bravery has been mocked, I do not doubt it. I could see the deep unease beneath Hakatri's ear fiercely. He sent me then to the visitors' court to discover whether the mortal men were still there, and if they had heard anything from Inaluki. I hastened across the palace, through the court of fowls, the dancing pavilion, and the lingering night shadows of the smoke gardens, coming at last and out of breath to the visitors' court. I found no evidence of Inaluki there, and the mortals themselves were still asleep. The one called Cormac returned with the guard I sent to them, his face flushed with either worry or embarrassment. At the time I knew little of mortals, and could not recognize the difference. I swear we know nothing of this, my lord, he told me. We were told to wait until your mom... I am no lord, I said, and neither are Unigato and Amaterasu our monarchs. They are our wisest elders, deep with foresight and lore. But even those wise elders, it seemed, had not foreseen Inaluki's sudden departure. In any case, I apologize for disturbing your peace. But is there something we can do to help? Our horses are rested. We could help you search for them. We could help you search for him. I almost smiled at the thought of mortals and mortal-raised horses being able to run down one of the brothers of the wind. You are kind, but my master has enough help. Wait for your audience. May fate smile on you. When I returned to the stables, I was dismayed to find that Yoe's search had also been fruitless, that Lady Nidreu had not seen Inaluki since the previous day. Lord Hakatri, knowing his brother had a running start, had already set the grooms to preparing both of his horses. It made me superstitiously uncomfortable to see someone else do the work that was mine to oversee, but I understood my master's haste. Armiger Pamon, he told me as he donned his witchwood armor, you will ride Frostmane. I will need fleet sea foam if I am to catch my brother. The rest of my master's companions had arrived and were getting ready to set out. They already seemed to know that their giant hunting trip had been eclipsed by something more important and even more perilous. Their faces were grim, and I heard none of the banter that usually accompanied preparations for a hunt. At last, as the first rays of dawn began to brighten the sky, we set out, with me riding Hakatri's powerful charger, Frostmane. I did not expect to keep up with my master and his friends, since what Hakatri wanted most was to catch his brother. My master and the rest of his hunting companions did indeed set out at a blazing pace, and soon left the rest of us far behind. The other squires, all young Zediah, lesser scions of Year-Dancing House, must have heard something of the unusual nature of the day's chase from Yoe. They did not speak to me about it. The other armigers spoke to me only sparingly at the best of times, and were it not for my master's exalted status, I doubt they would have acknowledged my existence at all. But I saw them murmuring among themselves, and their gestures were full of confusion and concern, even as Hakatri and his comrades sped away from us along the shore of Landfall Bay, galloping toward the West March Road. I know there are some, even among those in my master's family, who believe that the favor Hakatri showed me was merely a bid for attention in a court that loves the new and unusual. It is true that I was of the Pt.286 race, and that my father, Pt.2, was a mere groom, although even the Zedaya had to admit my sire had a skill with horses that no one of the year-dancing clan could match. Long before I was born, he had achieved a good name among the masters of the homeward city. But I swear it is also true that it was my own diligence, as well as the aptitudes I had from my father's bloodline, that led to Hakatri noticing me, toiling in the stables as a child. He said many times that when I first caught his eye, he did not know I was the son of Pt.2, but only admired my heart. My master was never known to lie, and why would he, in any case, about such a small thing? I was far from the only young Pt.286 working in the stables in those days. That is what my people do. We make ourselves useful to the Zedaya. Whether we sail the ships of our masters, or build their houses, or take care of their children, we ocean children do what we are given to do, and do it well. What is beyond doubt is that Hakatri did notice me. When he saw that I had my father's skill with animals, he made me his personal groom, and when he was disappointed by the young Zedaya offered to him for training as armigers, he decided to do a strange and unprecedented thing in choosing me, the first among my kind, to become his squire and right hand. Soon, hunts and other journeys, I learned to take care of his weapons, and more than a little of how to use them as well, though Lord Hakatri's own friends mocked him for having a changeling armiger, and made it clear in more subtle ways that they did not think much of me or my kind. They always told me, "The good name you will gain will far outlast even the cruelest jests." I was not certain even then that he was right, but I know Lord Hakatri believed it, so I tried to believe it too. I tell it now as a mark of how my master thought, and how honorably he treated me. Indeed, in many ways he was kinder to me than my own father had been, who had little patience with anyone less painstaking and single-minded than he was. My father made me diligent. My Lord Hakatri made me believe I could be something more than just my father's son. As I grew, I learned the skills of war and conflict, taught both by Hakatri himself and other instructors of Year-Dancing House. I practiced these lessons beside many young Zedaya nobles, some also training to be armigers, some to become lords errant in their own right. For a time, my lord's younger brother, Inaluki, trained with us, too, and for the first time in my life I felt myself to be almost an equal of the Zedaya themselves. It was a heady feeling, and also a perilous one, because it soon became clear to me in whispers and glances from my fellow students that many of them did not like to see one of the Pt.286 risen so far above the usual limits on my kind. Soon enough, though, I realized I would never be much of a warrior. I had a long reach, and was quick to learn that which required thought and understanding, but I was not as fast, nimble, or strong as any of the young Zedaya lords. Still, I worked hard to master the glaive and the swift sword as best as I could, and to learn the warrior's way, so that I might at least watch my master with the eye of experience. And though the young lords of Year-Dancing had previously resented my presence, when it became clear I would never threaten their prowess as warriors, they softened a little toward me. They never made me feel like one of them, but they at least came to accept my presence, although much of that was due, I think, to the high esteem in which my master was held. It was true then, and still is, that Lord Hecatri, eldest son of Azua's protector and Saansara, was held in great esteem, not just by me, but by all his people. Even the young lords errant of his generation, who sought to rival him, could not help but admire him. And that is no surprise, because he was altogether admirable. I never heard my master tell a lie, or even consider it. In this he was truly his mother's child, and I never saw him turn his back upon anyone who needed his help. His younger brother often scolded him for this, since Inaluki perceived it as a weakness. "If you are a friend to all," he would say, "then you are no better a friend to those closest to you than to those you barely know." But Hecatri would only shake his head at these complaints. And if I decided whom to help, simply by their closeness in blood or friendship, I would not be a lord errant at all, but a paymaster, tallying up the figures before deciding how much assistance to give others. In those days of general peace among the tribes of the Lost Garden, no role was prized more highly among the young Zidaya nobles than that of Lord Errant, which meant one who used his good name, good sense, and skill to help those who were in need, whether they be farmers beset by giants or settlements plagued by banditry. My master was so well known that even mortals came to Azua from leagues and leagues away to ask his help. Inaluki once spoke to me of it, and it was hard to tell whether he found it more amusing or infuriating. "Your master is like a god to the mortals," he told me. "They leave offerings for him at the gates of Azua, as if it were one of their shrines." "He has helped many of them, my lord," I pointed out. Inaluki gave me a long look that I did not entirely understand. "Yes," he said at last, "and his fondness for strays will cost him some day, I fear, though I pray that I am wrong." Such a strange pair, my master and his brother. Hecatri was dark and tall, solid as a standing stone, cheerful and talkative when the mood was on him, but more often quiet and thoughtful, even when others were at their most carefree. Inaluki was almost as tall as his elder brother, but far more slender, and all the Zidaya agreed that he had the fairer face. Where Hecatri preferred to read or talk with a friend or two, Inaluki loved to be in a crowd, jesting and singing. But just as the younger brother's good humor could set a room alight, so, when he was angry, could he empty a festive gathering in a short time. From the hour of his birth, it has been said, Inaluki burned more brightly and with greater heat than any of his people. But despite these differences, the love between the brothers was deep and strong. They fought sometimes, as brothers do, of course, especially because Inaluki felt that his elder brother often treated him more like a child than an equal, giving him advice and holding him back from one rash urge or another. Still, in most ways, they seemed almost like a single soul with two bodies, and it was rare to see one without finding the other somewhere close by. Soon left the rest of us far, far behind. We were following a much-traveled road, and because it was not easy to know whether our masters might have turned to follow a sideways track, the other armigers and I proceeded at a very deliberate pace through the steep, forested hills of the Protector's Chase. After many hours of riding, we came down onto the West March Road and made our way across the ford at the Little Red Wash River. We did not stop with nightfall. The Zidaya can ride for days without sleeping, and it was all I could do to remain safely in the saddle until dawn at last lit the eastern skies. Toward midday, we crossed the bridge over the Great Red Wash itself and descended into Kestrel Gap, the flatlands between the river and the White Wake Heights, the hill country south of the Sunstep Mountains. The Zidaya may seldom need sleep, but their mounts need to rest and eat, even the astonishingly hardy horses of the Azua stables. We rode until the stars were bright in the sky, then stopped to feed and water our mounts. After tending to Frostmane, I gratefully stole a few hours of sleep. 2 days had passed, and we still had seen no sign of Hakatri or his comrades. The land around us on the third day was unexceptionable and largely flat as we crossed Kestrel Gap, but the meadows were alive with cowslip, bluebell, and red campion. Again, we rode well past the fall of darkness, but near midnight we reached the Silver Way in the marshy lands along the outer edge of the fells, and it became too dangerous to ride even for my sharp-sighted fellow armigers. We stopped and built a fire. Large, fierce wolves roamed the Kestrel Gap in those days, and it had been a long, hungry winter in those mostly empty lands, so even the Zidaya were not disposed to be careless. As the stars of Luyasa's staff rose into the southwestern sky, the other armigers sat around the fire and sang songs of the garden. I found it a little strange, not that they should know so much about those vanished lands none of us had ever seen, but that I should know so little, since both our peoples called it the land of their birth. "You never sing, Pamon," Yohei said to me that night. It was one of the first times she had spoken to me since we had left Azua. "Do your kind never honor the lost home?" "Do not despise my silence. I would honor it if I knew how," I told her. "But the songs you sing were never taught to me." "How could that be?" The reason was that my father had never been the sort to sing to his child, and my mother, Enla, had been carried away by a fever when I was but 4 summers old. The only thing I remembered her telling me about our Tanukadaya heritage was about the dreaming sea. She told me it was a part of me, and always would be, though I never knew quite what that meant. After she died, I asked my father why she had said the dreaming sea was in my blood. The question made him angry. "Do not ever let our masters hear you talk that way," he told me. "If you speak of such things, our lords will think us ungrateful and superstitious." "But what is the dreaming sea?" "An old and foolish story about the lost garden. Your mother should not have told you such a thing." And that was the last my father Pamon Sir would ever speak about it. I was hurt by his refusal. The dreaming sea was something of my mother's that I was being denied, but I did not bring it up again, not even with the other Tanukadaya I knew, and the memory began to fade. Then, as I grew older, I came to understand that my people kept silent about many such things, for fear of displeasing our Zidaya masters. "Pamon, are you listening?" I realized I had been lost in memory. I ask your pardon, Yohei." She looked at me longer than felt comfortable. "It must be strange not to know your own story," she said at last. "But I do know my own story," I thought. After all, I was not merely another Tanukadaya servant. I was Pamon Kes, armiger, and great Lord Hakatri's right hand. Few of my people, I felt certain, had ever been raised higher. But, of course, I said none of this. In the late morning of the next day, we heard loud hoofbeats as the other armigers and I turned, prepared to fight if necessary, not certain whether these might be messengers from Azua demanding us to turn back, or a pack of the mortal bandits that were said to make their home in the dark heights beyond the gap, though I had never heard of mortals attacking a group of armed Zidaya. Instead of either, a company of men appeared from the east, and we saw by their banners that they were the same Western mortals who had come to Azua to ask for the Protector's help. The one called Cormac reined up as they reached us. "We heard that a company of your people were ahead of us, and we have run our horses almost to death trying to catch you," he said. "But look, your mounts are not even breathing hard." I smiled a little. The horses of Azua's stables travel swiftly without much effort, though we were not hurrying. "I am surprised to find your company so small, though," said the prince. "Did your folk not believe us when we told them about the monster we face?" Inaluki's armature, Yoe, who always assumed the role of leader in our company of squires, since my master might have been firstborn, but I was not Zediah, told him, "Our lords race ahead of us, mortal, but they will wait for us when they reach their destination. Still, there is no certainty they plan to hunt the dragon that has so badly frightened your folk." Cormac gave her a sour look. I could not help being impressed by this young mortal who clearly set himself as high as nearly any Zediah. "You say that as though only mortals would be afraid, Armiger. Wait until you see the worm and hear its rasping breath. Then we will see what you fairy folk are made from." His words seemed to anger Yoe, but Inaluki's squire was not as capricious as her master. She only shook her head, saying, "Nobody knows what they think of the dark until the sun sets." After a little more talk, it was decided that we would all travel together until we either caught up to the hunting party or our roads diverged. It was just as well we did not waste time arguing, because by early evening, when we had made our way a good distance along the lower edge of the White Wake Heights, we at last came upon my master and his company. They were gathered by the Silver Way, where it passed the mouth of a steep, narrow valley. I was relieved beyond words to see not only my own master, Hakatri, but his brother Inaluki too, although it was clear that the two of them were deep in disagreement. Hakatri was so angry he barely acknowledged me, and when Yoe went to greet her own lord errant, Inaluki waved her back with a hard swipe of his hand. "You talk to no purpose, brother," I heard Inaluki say, curling his lip. "I came out only to see this creature for myself. If it is as small as I guess it to be, I thought I might also dispatch it and end the threat to the mortals who live here. Surely even our father could not object to such kind stewardship." He smiled, but that flash of white put me in mind of a skin of bright ice hiding the black cold waters of a winter lake, and I wondered at the depths of Inaluki's unhappiness and anger. Still, his moods changed swiftly, and I hoped a more sensible one would overtake him soon. "You have been foolish," Hakatri told his brother in a low voice. "You have caused much work." The master's hunting party were waiting out the brothers' argument. We learned that the company had been halted here at the entrance to the valley since the middle of the day, Hakatri refusing. "I do not mean to interfere in your dispute, great lords," said the mortal Prince Cormac, "but as you know, this is the entrance to Serpent's Vale, where the worm has his lair. He is not often seen in daylight, but he emerges by night to take sheep and cattle and even people from the meadows all up and down these hills. It does not seem a good place to continue your argument, especially if you do not think it will be hastily resolved." It was plain to see that the herdsmen, as the mortals called themselves, did not like the place, and I confess I felt more than a little uneasy myself. The hills were high and rocky on either side of the gorge, and with the sun all but set and darkness spreading along the grassy slopes, it was a gloomy spot. I heard no birds at all, only a few crickets singing in the long grass to mark the coming of night. And I was not the only one to feel this apprehension. Several of my master's own folk watched the mouth of the valley with troubled faces. "We will not stay," Hakatri told the mortal prince. "We are returning to Azua, all of us. As it is, our father will be uncommonly angry, and even our mother will find herself out of patience. But we may yet repair what you have damaged by your willfulness, Inaluki. Willfulness? Inaluki closed his eyes as though his patience was being unfairly tested. These mortals came to Azua with tales of a deadly dragon, so I rode out to see it for myself. Now we stand on the creature's very doorstep, and you would turn back? What good is that to these people? He gestured toward Cormac and his bearded followers. What lesson will that teach them? That the house of year dancing is empty of brave hearts? We did not come to be taught any lessons, my lord, said Cormac, and now he seemed angry with Inaluki as well. We came to ask your help. There, do you see? Said Inaluki. All that is wanted, nothing to do with bravery, and everything to do with the will of the Protector and the Saonsara, my master replied. You left before our parents had made their decision, like a child bored with his lessons who runs out to play in the sun. For a moment it seemed that Inaluki's anger would overmaster him. He stared at his brother with such fury that I thought he might simply ride away again. Then his face changed once more, his fury either cooled or hidden. Your argument comes too late, brother, he said in a gentler tone. Perhaps I was heedless. Perhaps I was at fault. The garden knows sometimes I lose patience with our parents' excessive caution. But we are here now. At the very least we must track the beast and learn something of its true size and nature so that we may plan how to deal with this unwanted creature. The argument between the brothers continued, though they took themselves a little way apart from the rest of us. Cormac and his mortals finally built a fire. It was much larger than the one the Zediah and I had made the night before, and we all waited for my master and Inaluki to resolve themselves on what we should do next. It was well past middle night when Hakatri came to the fire. In the morning we shall make our way into the valley, a short way, to learn what we can of the worm the mortals say abides there, he told me quietly. I will ride Frostmane in case we meet trouble. So my master's younger brother had won the argument. I was not surprised. Inaluki, as his father often said, had the stubbornness of a badger defending its burrow. I was sorry to hear we would be traveling into that grim valley, because I did not like what I had already seen of the place. I spent much of the remaining night making certain my master's spearhead and sword blade were as sharp as an icy wind. And just a pause for a moment. Okay, we still appear to be doing fine in terms of still being on. Don't even have any messages that I've been kicked off like I did last night. Okay, continuing with the next section. If I had disliked the entrance to the gorge, I cared even less for the valley itself. Lord Inaluki and my master rode first, with Yoe and myself just behind them, followed by the rest of the lords errant and their squires, and then Prince Cormac with his own mortal men. We needed no guide, since the valley was narrow and the walls were high. The mouth of the gorge was strewn with broken or felled trees. I saw my master and his brother exchange a look, with Inaluki unable to hold his brother's stern gaze for long. The bottom of the valley was crisscrossed with coursing rivulets, so that the ground was everywhere a swamp, with bits of trees and rocks standing out here and there to make the going even more treacherous. Perhaps, because of the steepness of the valley's sides, the cloudy sky seemed to hang closely overhead, hemming us in from a third direction. It felt as if we were prisoners being led to some place of execution. For all the water and mud and new sprouted grass, the valley seemed curiously lifeless. The birds I had not heard the evening before were still absent today, and the crickets had fallen silent. The only noises other than those we made were the occasional jeers of crows or the hissing of mountain cicadas, oblivious to everything except their own short time in the sun. Though the sun kept rising through the cloudy sky, I never felt warm. The small streams that ran through the valley had flowed together in spots to make great brackish ponds, with the branches of half-submerged trees reaching up through the murky water like the arms of drowning swimmers. The steep hillsides were covered with thick growth, so that what little sound we made did not echo back to us. I could not help feeling like one who trespasses in another's house by night, hoping only to achieve whatever they came to do and escape before the house's owner awakes. Suddenly, Inaluki raised a hand. His brother, Nyohei, and I all reined up and waited silently. Inaluki extended a finger, pointing to Pompey Vale, where two large alder trees grew on either side of the track of higher ground we were following. At first I could make nothing of his gesture. What was before us looked no different to me than what was behind. But now my master also saw what his brother had seen, and I could tell by his face not to speak. Hakatri climbed down from Frostmane, and I took the charger's reins from him. Inaluki dismounted too, giving bronze to Yohei. "We should have brought hounds," Inaluki whispered to his brother. "We are not our cold Hikidaya kin," my master said quietly. "We do not send animals or slaves where we fear to go ourselves." As I watched, the two of them made their way forward, crouching low to the ground. Neither one had drawn a weapon, which puzzled me, but as I swung down from my saddle so I could better keep both of my master's horses calm, I finally saw what Inaluki had spotted. What I had supposed only another large tree root or fallen log, a dark cylindrical shape lying across the earthen track ahead of us, suddenly moved, and I realized it was no root at all, but a tail. The tail was of good size, that was beyond doubt. It certainly belonged to a drake of some kind, or an unusually large swamp serpent. But from where I sat, it appeared nowhere near as massive as I had feared from the stories the mortals told, and though my heart was beating very fast, I felt a little relief. Without being asked, I untied my master's boar spear so that it would be ready for him. I followed, still holding Frostmane's reins, leaving Seafoam waiting, but my master and Inaluki moved more swiftly. They were now some dozen paces ahead of me, creeping slowly but steadily toward the long, dark thing that lay motionless across the track. As I stood with Frostmane's reins in one hand and the heavy hunting spear in the other, the moment seemed to hang in the air and burn away in silence like a handful of lit straw. The black tail slid forward until it was almost out of sight. My master and his brother stayed close to it, trying to catch a glimpse of its owner. The rest of the company was strung out behind us along the high track. Then a great rattling sound passed all the way down the row of trees beside us. I turned in time to see a dark shape plunge out of the leaning trees and knock one of the Zedaya hunters to the ground, along with his shrieking horse. The attack happened far faster than I can describe it, and it took me a moment to realize that what had struck the rider down was not just a large beast, a bear or an angry boar, but a monstrous head on the end of a monstrously long neck. The rest of the beast still lay hidden behind the tangled trees that lined the path. My master Hakatri and the others had also turned back at that single terrible cry. The crashing, rattling sound grew louder as more of the dragon's serpentine body emerged onto the higher ground of the trackway behind us. The tail had not been overly large, but that was because we had seen only its very tip. The rest of the worm had been lying in the swampy track stretched parallel to the high ground and hidden by the thick brush and trees. We had passed right by its watching head. The horses reared in terror as the immense black dragon slithered out toward them. Then they scattered before it like mice, leaping away in all directions. Some of the startled horses immediately charged into the brackish water and foundered. Others reared in panic and flung their riders out of their saddles. The worm's front legs were short and bowed like those of a southern cockandrill, but it moved with surprising speed. The head on the long neck writhed from side to side, striking at everything it could reach like a furious adder. I only saw it in full for a moment, but that first sight of the monster will never leave my memory. The black worm had an armored head with a blunt, jagged beak like a turtle's, though no turtle was ever so huge. Its eyes, what little I could see of them as the head swept by, were golden rings at the center of staring black orbs, and its lusterless black armor ran in parallel rings down the length of its body, so that it rippled like an earthworm as it moved. The moment of stillness had given way to a din I hope I never hear again, shrieks of pain from horses and riders alike, the crash and splinter of fallen trees, and the dull, hideous crunch of the monster's heavy jaws as it bit through armor, flesh, and bone. From the corner of my eye, I saw my master and heard him shout, "My spear! Pamon, my spear!" Although I scarcely knew what I was doing, I pitched it toward him. But I was shouting, "No, my lord, the beast is too big," even as I threw it. Hakatri did not listen to my warning, but instead ran past me with the spear clutched in both hands and plunged it into the cold drake's side. The spearhead sank into the contorting black body, punching in all the way up to the spear's bronze-bound lugs, but the creature hardly seemed to notice. A moment later, a sideways contortion of its long body sent Hakatri flying into the trees. "Master!" I cried, forgetting even my overwhelming terror of the worm in my fear for him. I dropped Frostmane's reins and struggled through the broken trees and floating logs, quickly sinking into muddy water up to my hips as I left the track. Behind me rose the cries of the hunting party, but the worm itself remained oddly silent. I took one look back and saw the great blunt head rise high into the air, shaking into little pieces someone who had once had a name and a history, showering the track with a drizzle of blood. Then I turned away in staggering horror, still searching for my master. I found Hakatri at last, half sunk in a backwater pool, tangled in broken branches. His face was out of the water, and he was breathing, but though I shook him, I could not summon any movement or sign of life. The noises from behind me were terrible. The ragged screams of the hunting party, and the noise of splintering spear hafts and shattering tree trunks combined into a skull-scraping din beyond my ability to describe. And I think we're going to stop there. That is what I think. If I can figure out again how to do a note. Okay. Yes. We're going to stop there for tonight because it is 8 o'clock. And so I assume we stayed on the whole time, which would be good. Yes. Excellent. Anyway, so I am going to be back next Sunday, 1 a.m. and then at 7 p.m. As I always say, thank you very much for spending time with me. I appreciate it. Gives me something to do, keeps me out of trouble. off the streets, the mean, mean streets of Palo Alto. That's a joke. Anyway, and that's really all I wanted to say, except to take hangers on, anybody that happens to need it, if you can manage. Pay it forward. Pay it forward. And until next Sunday, I will say only peace and see you soon. Ciao.